Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting and acquisition communities and our industry partners get to connect, talk, listen, and most importantly, learn from each other. My name is William Randolph, and I'd like to introduce you to my co-host, my colleague, my partner, my friend, CYA Carrera. Hello, CYA.
Hey, Will, how you doing today?
Doing amazing. How are you?
Good, and I'm really excited because we have our first guest.
All right, let's get to it.
All right. Let me start with our disclaimer so everybody knows what we're here and why we're here and what we're all about. So our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions. But as Will said, sometimes we let a few of those slip. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the private and public sectors. And this morning, I want to start out, first of all, by a big shout out to all of our friends and colleagues out there in the federal acquisition community. As I've always said, I'm just so proud to be a part of that community, to have been a part of that community, to continue to be a part of that community. And today I'm really excited because one of the members of that community is joining us. Our guest speaker today is an attorney that both Will and I have worked with in our career. And it was interesting when we were thinking of guest speakers, we both came up with this name separately without even having conferred with one another. So that should tell you something about the impression that she has made on us, as well as the great work that we've done together. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our former colleague from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's where we both met her. I believe we both met her there. Yes. Jennifer Longmire Wood. She is currently with Executive Law Partners, LLC. Jennifer, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now.
Hey, you guys. Thanks so much for having me. As I told you guys when you asked me to do this, I joked around saying, setting the bar low, so future guests gonna knock it out of the park. But yes, so a little background on me. I spent almost 20 years in the government, started off in DC government, doing procurement there, also some child support work, and then back to procurement. Then I jumped over to ICE, where I started in procurement there again. And as we were talking, when I was there, when I started there, I was one of 2 procurement attorneys for the whole agency.
Unbelievable.
We had Federal Protective Service still under the ICE umbrella. So one attorney did all FPS stuff because she had come from Capitol Police. And then I did everything else that came up. And this was at the time when we were just getting started, just really standing up the acquisition folks there. It was an amazing, crazy time. So DC government definitely prepared me for fire drills and craziness, and it was great. ICE was wonderful. I got to work with both of you there, and along with some colleagues, Nina Soraya, who was over FPS doing procurement work, and we did some great stuff there. ICE was also fantastic. It gave me opportunity to grow. I was a chief counsel for a while. I was a deputy over the chief counsel on the East Coast for a while, and then I'm back into the procurement world where I love to be, where it's never a boring day. I left ICE in 2019 to kind of go pursue some other things, and so one of them is XLP that allows me as a counsel to sort of come and go and set my schedule, which is wonderful as a mom of 2 teenagers. I also do some consulting on the side with some other folks with another firm I started, Ray Saluta. So I miss the government. It was so much fun. Will and I were talking about just sort of problem solving and making things happen. But this sort of Gen Part 2 is a lot of fun as well. And I get to spend some time this morning with you. You guys.
Awesome.
That's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to highlight a couple things that you said. Yes, Nina Ferraro introduced us
Yes.
Because Nina was over FPS procurement, and now she's the deputy chief procurement officer at
Hey.
was recently announced. And I've worked with Nina for quite a long time, and just a fantastic person. But also, when you talk about immigration and customs enforcement, I'm excited to hear what you have to say today, because they have no shortage of challenges there. I was their first head of contract when we stood up the department. And I just remember the challenges we had back then, let alone as we've progressed. But certainly they've come a long way. So let's give a big shout out to our friends at ICE. Hello, good morning, my friends at ICE. I hope you're on the line and hearing all the great things we're going to say about you. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Will Randolph, who will introduce our topic of the day.
So Jennifer, thank you, Sarai. So Jennifer, I have this phrase that I use all the time: bring your lawyer with you. Okay. So from a standpoint of just our experiences in government, specifically in the times we've worked together, when you think about it from a procurement perspective, what do you think is the value proposition? I know is the value proposition of having your lawyer not only on the team, but what do you think is the value proposition of having the lawyer in the mix early and often from a standpoint of advancing a given agency's acquisition goals and objectives?
Yeah, that's a great question, Will. I mean, I'm biased. I'm an attorney, so I'm going to be like, yes, I should always be in the room. But it is, I think, depending on where you are in the procurement process, also depending on what type of procurement it is, definitely. So in general, like on small stuff, the repetitive stuff that's going to happen every day, sometimes there's a better way to build that mousetrap. And so talking with your attorney is where you can bounce ideas off, or help manage the client on those things that happen every day. Definitely on the bigger acquisitions, again, the thing is getting the attorney involved early means, to me, because I love to ask a lot of questions and understand why are we doing this? Why do we need this service? Why do we need this product? What are we trying to accomplish? Because I think that can help people frame how are we going to do the acquisition then? What's the path we're going to start off with, first of all? And then as you're moving through that path, it can be, hey, what do we think the challenges are going to be? When the client comes in and they're like, we have 54 things we need to rate this vendor on. And we're like, yeah, that's too many. Let's narrow that and try and help them understand that. For the attorney, as the procurement goes forward, we're able to issue spot. Are we going to run into issues with protests along the way? And where do we need to do risk mitigation along the way? And so as we're moving forward into that, I sort of, for the attorneys I worked with, I would always say, we sort of know what's coming, so we know, is there a high probability we're going to get a protest? Yes, but we're going to mitigate it in this way. Or, okay, we're going to have a protest, but we know we're going to do a really good job documenting things, and we're going to make sure it's documented well. So it's just those things to try and keep folks within the guardrails, as I'd like to say. And definitely, I've had it happen on high profile or high dollar value, where it's just helpful as the procurement folks having your attorney next to you when you're in that meeting, briefing senior leadership on here's where we are in the procurement, we're still on track, or, God forbid, like you're getting a protest, that, you're sitting next to them as counsel saying, yes, we've worked with everybody on this. Yes, we feel confident, or I'm not panicking about this. So let's not all panic about the procurement. Let's just sort of keep things moving forward. So I think it's a sounding board, it's a resource, and, kind of like, the calm, I like to think sometimes the calming mechanism in the room, that you're like, your attorneys are aware of what's going on. We're good.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, I love it. So Sarai, I know this is probably
I'm itching.
fresh for you. These relationships. What are your thoughts there on those points?
So first of all, Jennifer, you hit it right out of the ballpark. That's the truth. In fact, one of the things that I tried to do at DHS was bring us early, especially on the large, impactful procurements, the politically sensitive procurements, or the large dollar value, or the ones that we knew were going to have a lot of visibility, do some acquisition planning and bring the attorneys to the table. And I have often said this, and in fact, I think I said it in our last podcast. A lot of people think that lawyers are risk averse, and what they don't understand is the job of the attorney is to identify the risks of the procurement, and then it's our job to say, okay, here's how we think we can mitigate that risk, right? How we can work together to mitigate that risk. I've often said that just like talking to the program, and I agree with you, we come to the program together and ask our questions and get that briefing. That's why I like the planning cycle, because you get that briefing on what's the requirement, what's, what the parameters we got to live with, what's the budget, et cetera. What are the issues? What did we encounter if we did this before, or what we have seen elsewhere? But also, I think it's extremely important to then have that conversation, the procurement, having that conversation with the attorney, that is also a series of questions. Like, instead of saying, I want to do X, here's what I'm trying to achieve. Tell me how I get there. Get me there, right? And help me understand where my pitfalls are. So definitely agree on that. Talk to me a little bit, because sometimes you just mentioned something very important in your intro. You were one of 2 attorneys. So you can't be everywhere all the time. So let's talk a little bit about the reality of where we work, right? That we are all constrained when it comes to resources, especially legal and procurement. Talk a little bit about that. What's a good way to bring the attorney to the table when they're so overworked and overwhelmed?
So I think one of the things that I did when I first started in DC government was, we were all fortunate that most of us were all in one building. There were a couple of departments elsewhere in the city, but the bulk of the acquisition people were in the same building. And when I started, my boss was like, oh yeah, they're like 2 floors below. If you ever have a question, you can just run down there. And so that's like, I went downstairs, like, hi, I'm the new attorney. So part of it is getting folks to understand, new attorneys or new to procurement, like you're a government attorney, you're going to be overwhelmed, but you're going to especially be overwhelmed in procurement. So B, you cannot do it all, but C, go meet those people so that they know who you are and that you're available. A lot of it, also when I started before, they put like a muckety muck title on me, was going and talking with the head of, contracting and her deputy and saying, what do you guys need? Like, what, I'm here, my plate's already over full and it's my second day. Like, what are you concerned about? And so right away, they were able to say, hey, we have like these little things that we just want to get settled, whether it was we need a new template for something, or we need a better way to like contact you, like whatever that is. The communication piece is key, because then they understand where I am as the attorney. I understand where you guys are coming from. And we sort of had a list of, here are the things that we want to accomplish together outside of the day-to-day like procurement stuff, so like I said, whether it was designing templates, which we did for a bunch of stuff at ICE that just made everything flow much easier. Protest numbers dropped because, it wasn't 12 different contracts for the same, for guard services or beds, where I was like, we're going to have a template so everybody knows like what we're getting all the time. Some of it was just identifying training and saying, okay, let's figure out how we'll get training in here. A lot of it was just them knowing that they could email an attorney and that I would get back to them. Maybe not 5 minutes after they sent the email, but also they could call me. They could, I told them where my office was. Like, communication, key.
Yeah, you just hit on one of my key buzzwords, one of the C's. I always talk about communication, consistency. I think it's extremely important. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You got to build that relationship before you need it. Right? Yeah. I always reached out trying to meet my attorneys. And in fact, sometimes we would set up like recurring meetings, just touch points, to say maybe once a month, hey, what's going on? Are we having any issues? Are there any problems? Or what are the big issues we need to solve? Because sometimes communication is the key to success. Over to you, Will.
So, Jennifer, one of the things I remember working with you was, and what I found to be a very unique characteristic, and I call it the willingness to be convinced. Because I think, when we were working together, I was one that was not wedded to the way we did it yesterday. It's like, okay, we got it. We got that data point, but I was not, I wasn't wedded to breaking out a cookie cutter and just slamming out what we've always done. And I always found that you were very willing to be convinced. Is that a trait that is kind of just innate to you? Is that something that procurement attorneys are taught, or is that something unique in this? Just we must try to have teams that are willing to be convinced. Is that a thing? From your opinion, is that a characteristic that needs to be perpetuated more, in your opinion?
I think it needs to be perpetuated a lot more. I think, again, from my, my viewpoint is I like to know why we're doing what we're doing. Because to me, and I would, when I would talk with the attorneys on my team and say, it gives you the bigger picture of how we're trying to fit this in. And it helps us explain to our bosses as well, why something is important. Because a lot of times, at ICE, obviously immigration is, primary focus, and then, the enforcement side that HSI does, it's law enforcement. So that's always like first, and then sort of all the other stuff. And I would tell people, look, like this doesn't work unless, procurement is working to get you what you need, the people, the software, the guns, the whatever you need to do your job. And so it was really key that we understand, because there were times where, even as attorneys, we were not always, it was teaching the other attorneys, like how important it is. Like, this is really important. Like, we need to get this procurement unstuck and it needs to move. But my boss, like, I cannot carry that water. I can to the 11th floor, but nobody's going to listen to me. But they're going to listen to you when you go in for your weekly principals meeting. So I need you to get this unstuck for me, please. Yeah. So everybody is like not burning up my phone and my email saying it's procurement's fault, it's the attorney's fault. When I'm like, well, if it's stuck, it's kind of everybody's fault. So we got to work together to get it unstuck. So I would, so my view is trying to get people to understand, like, we don't need to get into the weeds, but we kind of need to have the bigger picture, because then that helps. And then we're all talking and we might find where, hey, wait a minute, like somebody else has done this before. So maybe we can borrow some of that to do what we need to do here.
That makes total sense. And I am so happy that I had that experience. Sadly, it was later in my career, because I've had some other experiences that didn't feel like that. Now, Sarai, I'm sure you've had in the course of your career some of those relationships that didn't feel as collaborative as they could have been.
But you also have to look for that collaboration, right? I love the phrase willingness to be convinced. It's another way of saying listening to one another. That's really what we're talking about, because it's not unique to the attorneys. It's also us, the contracting community, the program officials, the financial people. We got to be willing to listen to one another and understand each other's perspectives. It's something that I constantly talk about. It's that how we interact and how we talk to one another and understand the positions that we are all taking and why we take them, right? Because we all come at it from a different perspective, right? Our roles are different. What we're looking at is very different. So I like that phrase, willingness to be convinced. And by the way, I apologize. We're on live TV and my phone went off. I apologize for that. But I want to continue the conversation. One of the things we talked about a little bit was purpose of procurement, right? And the purpose of procurement, right, is not only to buy the essential goods and services that are needed to conform to the mission, to support the missions. And all of the agencies have vital missions. You name it. I always use Social Security. They got to get those checks out, right? IRS, they got to take our money. No, just kidding. IRS, but they run our financial operations in the federal government. Kidding, I got to pay taxes. Anyway, but all these missions are extremely vital, and it is really important what we do. And the purpose of procurement is to support those missions, but there's a secondary purpose and a very important purpose to procurement. And that is to ensure fairness, competition, to ensure that those taxpayer dollars are being used wisely and judiciously, and to also support the socioeconomic programs of the president, the policy initiatives, et cetera, of the administration. So I thought I'd let you talk a little bit about that compliance side, right? How do we balance that mission need with that compliance, that ensuring that we can achieve all these goals and objectives we have while we effectively buy for the federal government to support the mission.
Yeah, that's that's like a plane from Orlando Airport now flying over my hotel right now. Well, yes, very key. And also, yes, another very important aspect of procurement, but also, as you know, you would hear from the clients, also can be a very frustrating aspect for them. And they're like, oh, it's got to be a small business, or I got to jump through all these hoops to do X or Y or Z. So sometimes it is having a conversation of like, look, these are the goals and we want to do this. And it only makes things better when there's more competition in the marketplace. And when we're not wedded to, there are only 3 people that can do this. It's like, are there? Because, Will and I were talking before, we got started here on this podcast about one of the firms I'm working with has like a mentorship program. So when they find a good small business that they're like, hey, those people are pretty good, know what they're doing, but like they do not understand how to put together a proposal for the government, which is bringing them in and sort of mentoring them to say, here's how it looks. DC government had the same thing of mentoring people. That only makes the marketplace stronger. That only means people, to your point, Will, being like, I'm not going to do it like how I always did it. Somebody out there has a really smart idea, whether it's making a widget better, software better, a service better, like somebody's got a good idea. And we want to encourage that to get into the marketplace, because this is capitalism and competition is what's going to drive everything. Competition is going to drive innovation. It's going to drive hopefully to a better price. But sometimes you got to pay more to get the thing that you want. It's not always about the lowest price, but it just sort of opens up avenues. And we should be supportive of that. But it can be difficult because people think it's a million more hoops to jump through, and not always. It's just maybe a different piece of paper we got to fill out to get it done.
Yeah, it's thinking about it a little more smartly. And if I could, Will, I wanted to also interject here the innovation in procurement, because one of the things that we also have to do, we in our community, as we are looking at compliance, we got to find ways to make it easier for companies to come to us, for companies to come in and introduce their products, introduce their services, and bid on government contracts. And I think we're seeing that move. The Procurement Innovation Lab at DHS is doing that, and a lot of organizations have stood up innovative approaches and trying to do things differently. But I was listening to the news this morning, and we're talking about the fact that, we have supply chain problems. We need to be making more in America. We have an executive order that tells us that. How do we make that happen? I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, Jennifer.
Gosh, well,
I know I packed a lot in there because,
you did.
I like challenging the lawyers in the room. I just kidding.
Yeah. I think when you were speaking before, I was thinking exactly of the Procurement Innovation Lab. As both something that sometimes our customers, our clients were like, oh, they want us to do what? And it was like, no, like, this is good. This is going to be different. It's going to move it along faster. It's a different way of doing it. But to your point, it's also convincing industry, like, come and talk to us. Like, what are the hurdles? What can we do? What are thoughts so we can improve on things? But I think it's that encouragement and getting folks to do it and getting folks to feel comfortable about doing it. And that it's going to be difficult to, maybe stand up, or it's going to be bumpy at first, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be successful. And we won't know until we sort of get out there and try it and then discover, okay, like, we need to tweak this, we need to change this, or maybe this idea just didn't work at all. So I think to the bigger, like, supply chain issues, it's thinking out of the box, like, where else can we go? How else can we do this? Who do you know? Making those connections between people and opening up avenues, finding a way to think differently about how government, spends its money. Because so much of it, to get off on a tangent, not too far down the rabbit hole, into whether it's tax incentives or block grants or, some way that you can spend that money more efficiently and just not have it be the old way of doing things. That doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater, but maybe you start on a small scale and you start to see success, and then you begin to sort of transition toward that.
Yeah, investing in solutions.
Yeah.
And I've long held that, you know, we really want to encourage the market. If we want people to build here, we are probably going to have to pay a little extra to do that, but it's worth it in the long run. And sometimes we forget the long game, right? We think about today, instant gratification, you know, that's who we are. We think about instant gratification, but we got to start thinking about that long game. What do you want?
And I think that's a challenge with the government, right? Because you work for an administration, and the administration says, here are my priorities, and this is where we need to go. And the administration has a finite period, you know, 4 years, but the government's really big and it's hard to move it. And, you know, like, you know, okay, we're going to implement this new whatever. You know, I just think like just the IT solutions are the biggest thing, because I mean, we still have these ancient legacy systems. And everybody complains, like, I don't get it. Like, why can't I be on an iPhone 24 and like the government still is like in flip phone world? And it's like, well, you know, it's a lot of agencies and a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And when all of this started, like IT was not where it is today. Yeah. But that long-term investment of saying, we've got to invest now and invest heavy. Otherwise, you know, we might as well go back to like, you know, paper files, which nobody wants.
Right.
So Jennifer, I have a follow-up question. I remember earlier in my career learning the value of case law. You know, at the beginning, I thought it was like, okay, you got this list of shalls and we got this list of shall nots, and that was the recipe. Okay, but what I learned was there's this huge swath in the middle that is informed by case law that is ever changing. And so the value concept, let's talk about case law a little bit and how it influences procurements.
So obviously it does. I mean, you know, as we've talked about, like, I think can be difficult for attorneys to constantly stay on, like all of them, to stay on top at the same time. And so I know on my team, there were definitely folks who, you know, we had one who was a former clerk from the COFC. So he was very well attuned on like what was going on and sort of keeping us at our team meetings apprised of, hey, there was a new case. Well, if you have a really good team that communicates, and he was going, hey, there's this new case. Suddenly other attorneys were starting to pay attention. And so we were having that conversation of, hey, there's this new case. Oh, I found this other case. And so working with the procurement folks, because, you know, it's one thing to like send a bunch of attorneys to like the West contract year in review, and we sit there all day for 3 days and somebody's up there walking you through every single, you know, case that's going on, but sort of how we take those nuggets and get them back to the procurement folks. You know, we tried different ways to do it. You know, some was like a one pager of like, hey, this case is really important. Here's what it stands for. Here's the takeaways. Here's things we need to be mindful of. But that was sort of even like too legally, you know, for the acquisition folks. And so a lot of it came down to, again, just two things. One was just sort of in the daily communication as my team was working with the acquisition folks. And so whether it was saying, hey, you know, laws change a little bit. So, you know, how they're looking at past performance, we need to be mindful of how we're writing that up. Or when we're evaluating things, like, we've got to watch the language. It needs to be consistent. Or this is the language that the courts are really poo-pooing on. So we need to, you know, work on how we're going to write things up. The other piece was, you know, for us as the attorneys and giving you guys training and really setting up a training schedule with the acquisition folks. So some was, you know, acquisitions coming and saying, hey, every year we just want to do an overview of ABC with the contract specialists and the contracting officers. But then also my team being very mindful, and us being very mindful of, we need to start informing them of like, kind of our little mini year in review of like
Right.
what we're seeing when it comes to evaluations and past performance, or, especially in protests, here's what we're seeing is happening and where the GAO is sort of leaning one way or the other. But it was, again, that conversation, but trying to work it into training, we found was the much easier way to try and keep folks abreast of everything.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, folks, it's about that time. And as we always say, our greatest challenge will be to be able to stop talking.
But I have like 10 other questions. No, just kidding.
You can do
But
this again.
But we don't want to miss the opportunity to share with our community some what we like to call, kind of the golden nugget. So as our guest, Jennifer, would you like to give your community, our community, the whole government GovCon community, is there a nugget you'd like to share?
I think there were like three, if I may, small nuggets that overachiever.
Well, for the guest, you can do whatever.
Yeah. First, I would say, and I've told like all clients this, like the FAR is a very thick book with tiny print, and there's a lot of options in there. And so don't be afraid of the FAR. There's a way to get forward in there. Because my sort of sub thing of the FAR is, as an attorney, I would say, hey, look, as long as it's not illegal or unethical, like we got a lot to work with in there. Hence back to the FAR. I would say build strategy together with the procurement folks and with your customers, because it's all about risk mitigation, trying to get them what they want. And the third thing is always CYA, call your attorney. Start from the beginning, call your attorney, let them know what's going on. Ask if you want the attorney in there in the beginning, or just say, hey, I'm just giving you a heads up. In like 3 months, we're going to be calling you on this.
I love it. I love it. I think we've got the title for the podcast for this.
Exactly.
CYA. Soraya, your golden nugget for the week.
Wow. I mean, I can't top that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard.
About the flexibility, about strategize together. I mean, these are the things that I've always harped on. And I love the CYA, call your attorney, or what the other phrase that CYA stands for. But I think the nugget that I like to leave people with is the importance of the relationships, understanding the relationships, the communication are key, and building that relationship before you need it. Right. I always found that when I knew who my attorney was and kind of what their thought processes were, and I knew the ones that were going to be stubborn versus the ones that would be very flexible and open, knowing that is extremely important, because when you have a problem, it's not the time to learn that this person is inflexible or that we're going to bump into each other, right? That we're going to knock heads. So building those relationships makes it easier to communicate. And I got to tell you, one of the things that I said, and I say this very sincerely, I've always enjoyed really good relationships with my procurement attorneys, even the ones that, drove me up a wall, the ones that drove me crazy. I still got along with them because we have to make this work, and it's important, and we're all aiming at the same objectives. So my nugget is those relationships matter. Communicate.
I love it. Man, y'all taking all the good ones.
I told you. That's why you don't let us go first.
Okay. So I think if I had to grab from one, it always costs more later. When I mean, if you don't involve people early, your lawyer early, your team members early, whenever you have to interject a solution downstream after you've been building for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, building a strategy, it always costs more. It's either more time, more money, more chaos, more pain, more administrative burden. It always costs more later. So, bring the people, get everybody upstream, get them involved early, because it always costs more later in the system. So, and with that, I think we've got another one in the books. Jennifer, thank you so very much. You've been an amazing guest. I appreciate it. And we didn't expect anything less than your ability to continue to deliver, as you did for us. I have fond memories of our time together. Soraya, another great episode in the books. Thank you so very much. Any last notes, Sarai?
I just want to say a big thank you to Jennifer for joining us today and joining us in Talking Acquisition. It's always fun to see you, talk to you, and most importantly, thank you for your service. As much as I thank Will every week for the service, it takes people like us to make the government happen, and people like us are out there right now doing the job, and I hope they find this conversation helpful. But thank you for joining us, Jennifer.
I love
Well,
that,
thank you
Sarai.
both for having me. It's been fun. Let's do it again. Remember, it takes a village, from the most the most amenable attorney to the most stubborn one. Takes a village, and we all work together.
And with
Thank
that,
you both for your service. Thank you.
thank you so very much. And with that, we will see you next week.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.